I grew up thinking she was untouchable. Now, I'm the one putting her to bed. The first time I saw her in over a decade, it was almost surreal. I was walking down the street, lost in thought, when a familiar laugh, light, teasing, and somehow exactly the same as I remembered, stopped me mid-step. My eyes lifted, and there she was, standing outside a small cafe, a cup of coffee cradled in her hands. Time had softened the sharp lines of her face, added streaks of silver to her hair, but her presence, it was unmistakable. She had always had that quiet grace, a calm authority that made even a child like me feel safe and somehow seen. For a moment, I just stared. There was a warmth in her smile, the kind that seemed to hold a secret just for me. She tilted her head, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear, and her eyes met mine with a spark of recognition that made my chest tighten. Memories flooded back, scraped knees, bedtime stories, the way she used to laugh at my clumsy attempts to impress her as a kid. And now, here she was, standing in the golden light of the afternoon, effortlessly elegant, and utterly captivating. "Wow," she said, her voice playful. "You've grown." The words were casual, but the way she said them, with a teasing lilt and a faint smirk, made my stomach flip. I noticed the subtle ways she moved, the gentle sway of her posture, the slow grace in the way she lifted her cup to her lips. There was something magnetic about her presence, the kind that makes the world quiet down for a moment. I found myself smiling, hesitant, awkwardly aware of the slight trembling in my hands. "Yeah, I guess I did," I muttered, my voice low, almost drowned out by the bustle of the street. There was a strange intimacy in the familiarity, an unspoken acknowledgement of years past and the life we'd both lived separately. The air between us seemed charged with something I couldn't quite name, a mix of nostalgia, curiosity, and a subtle pull I hadn't anticipated. She stepped closer, and I noticed the faint scent of her perfume, warm, earthy, with a hint of something floral that brought back childhood memories of sleepy afternoons and bedtime stories. The sunlight caught in her eyes, making them glimmer, and I realized I was holding my breath. My mind raced with the contrast of time, the girl who used to chase me around the garden, and the woman before me now, confident and quietly luminous. She smiled again, a little more softly this time, and I felt a tug in my chest, a mixture of longing and respect. I realized then that this wasn't just a chance encounter. It was a moment suspended between past and present, where the boundaries of childhood memories and adult emotions blurred. The street, the cafe, the gentle crunch of leaves underfoot, everything faded slightly, leaving just the two of us and a quiet anticipation, the kind that makes you aware of every heartbeat, every breath, every tiny shift in the air. It was the kind of reunion that promised more than conversation. Something unspoken lingered, waiting to be discovered. After that first moment of stunned recognition, the air between us seemed charged with a curious energy. She leaned against the cafe doorway, sipping her coffee, and I realized how effortlessly she carried herself, a combination of quiet confidence and understated charm. I could feel my chest tighten again, an odd mix of nostalgia and something uncomfortably warm, like standing too close to a fire. "You remember the time you tried to build a fort in my living room and ended up breaking my mom's lamp?" she asked, her voice soft but carrying that familiar teasing lilt. Her eyes twinkled with amusement, and I felt that old nervous excitement of being caught doing something silly. I laughed, a little embarrassed, and found myself remembering the incident in vivid detail, the toppled cushions, my frantic attempts to hold the collapsing structure together, and her patient yet exasperated laugh as she told me to be careful. "Maybe a little," I admitted, rubbing the back of my neck. Her smirk deepened, and she tilted her head in that way that always made me feel like she knew something I didn't. That look, half amusement, half curiosity, made my stomach flutter in a way I hadn't felt since I was a kid nervously trying to impress her. Then, as if to punctuate her point, her fingers brushed mine when she reached for her cup, and the light contact sent a shiver up my arm. It was a casual touch, almost accidental, but it lingered long enough that I was acutely aware of the warmth of her skin, the subtle pressure of her hand. I withdrew my own hand slowly, my heart beat a little faster than before. The conversation shifted naturally, teasing and reminiscing intertwining. She asked about my work, my friends, and the quiet details of my life since we last met, and I found myself opening up in a way I hadn't expected. Her gaze was patient, steady, and strangely encouraging, like she could see past the layers I'd built around myself over the years. Each laugh, each smirk, each small glance carried a weight I was only beginning to understand. I noticed the little things, the way her shoulder brushed mine when she leaned in to emphasize a point, the subtle sway of her posture as she spoke, the soft cadence of her voice that seemed to wrap around the words and make them more intimate. It was playful, yes, but there was also a tension beneath it, a quiet pull that hinted at something deeper, something neither of us dared to name yet. For a moment, I caught myself imagining the past and present converging, the little boy she used to watch over, now a man standing across from her, aware of the unspoken distance between us. And she was still the same woman I had admired, but with a depth, a subtle vulnerability that made her all the more captivating. When she finally laughed at one of my awkward jokes, the sound was lighter than I remembered, yet it carried a richness that tugged at my chest. Her hand briefly lingered near mine again, a silent invitation I almost didn't notice, almost. And in that tiny, fleeting contact, the world seemed to shrink to just the two of us, suspended in an afternoon where nostalgia, playfulness, and an unspoken tension wrapped tightly together. It was the kind of encounter that promised more than a reunion. It promised questions, curiosity, and a slow, simmering connection that neither of us could yet name but both could feel. The playful tension lingered between us, but as the afternoon wore on, the laughter softened into something quieter, more thoughtful. We wandered toward a nearby park, the golden light of late afternoon filtering through the trees, casting long shadows across the path. The rustle of leaves underfoot and the distant hum of city life created a kind of private world, a bubble where the years felt both vast and strangely inconsequential. We found a bench near a small fountain, and we sat together, a polite distance at first, our shoulders almost brushing. She sipped from her coffee cup, and I noticed the delicate tremor in her fingers, subtle, almost imperceptible, yet enough to make me want to reach out, steady her hand. But I hesitated, caught between memory and desire, unsure of how close I was allowed to be. "I've always wondered," she began softly, her voice carrying that quiet curiosity she had perfected over the years. "What it's like for you, moving through life, figuring things out." Her gaze didn't waver, and there was no judgment, only genuine interest. I swallowed hard, realizing that no one had ever asked me that with such patience, such careful attentiveness. "It's sometimes overwhelming," I admitted, keeping my voice low. "I guess I thought by now I'd have it all figured out, but I don't. Not really." My words were heavy with honesty, and I felt a flicker of vulnerability, the kind that makes your chest feel tight but your mind clearer. She reached out, almost instinctively, and her fingers brushed mine, lingering longer than necessary. The warmth of her skin, the gentle pressure, felt grounding, like an anchor in the storm of my own uncertainty. I looked down, caught in the subtle intimacy of the gesture, and realized my heart had picked up a rhythm I hadn't noticed before, quick, erratic, but strangely steady in her presence. "I know exactly what you mean," she whispered, her voice barely above the sound of the fountain's gentle splashing. She shifted slightly, turning toward me, her elbow brushing mine in a soft, accidental caress that made my chest flutter. "Life, it doesn't wait for anyone. And sometimes, we just have to take it one step at a time." Her words, simple yet sincere, carried a warmth I couldn't ignore. She leaned back slightly, but her gaze stayed fixed on me, steady and unwavering, as though offering a silent reassurance that it was okay to be vulnerable, to admit uncertainty. I felt the layers of formality between us dissolve, leaving only two people, honest and present, connected through shared emotion rather than shared history alone. We sat in silence for a moment, the kind of silence that doesn't feel empty but full of possibility, of unsaid words, of lingering questions. I realized then that this wasn't just nostalgia or casual reunion. It was a quiet confessional of sorts, a space where I could lay down defenses I didn't even know I'd built. She smiled softly, her hand brushing lightly against mine again, and the simple gesture spoke louder than any words. The warmth of her touch, the steadiness of her presence, made the world around us feel distant. In that moment, it was clear, this connection, subtle and unspoken as it was, had shifted into something deeper, something neither playful nor casual, but profoundly human. And for the first time, I felt seen, not as the boy she once babysat, but as the man I was becoming, someone she could meet halfway, hand in hand, in a space suspended between past and future. The quiet park had become our small sanctuary. The sunlight softened into a gentle amber as the day leaned toward evening, and I realized we had been talking, or perhaps just sitting together, for hours. There was no rush, no expectation, only the gentle rhythm of our presence side by side. We decided to walk back toward her apartment, a slow, meandering route filled with familiar streets and quiet corners. Every step felt charged with a subtle awareness. Her hand occasionally brushed mine as we passed, a light, fleeting contact that lingered in memory long after the moment had passed. My senses were acutely tuned to the warmth of her touch, the sound of her soft laughter drifting in the evening air, the comforting scent of her perfume mingling with the crisp twilight. When we reached her door, she paused and looked at me, a playful yet serious glint in her eyes. "Do you want to come in for a bit?" she asked, and though her words were casual, the invitation carried layers of meaning, trust, comfort, and a quiet curiosity. I nodded, and we stepped inside, greeted by the familiar warmth of her home, muted lighting, the faint aroma of candles, and the soft hum of music playing in the background. Inside, our conversation slowed even further. We moved naturally through the apartment, her showing me small changes she'd made over the years, little details that revealed her personality, a vase carefully placed on a shelf, a painting tilted just slightly, a book open to a favorite page. I found myself reaching out to steady a leaning frame, our fingers brushing, and the subtle pressure of her hand against mine felt electric in the quiet room. We ended up sitting together on the sofa, close but not immediately touching, yet the space between us felt charged. I noticed the warmth radiating from her body, the soft brush of her hair as it fell near my arm. She adjusted her position slightly, and our shoulders touched, just a gentle press, but the effect was profound. The world outside faded. The only thing that existed was the quiet intimacy of shared space, the unspoken acknowledgement of connection. At one point, I helped her carry a tray of tea to the sofa. Her hand lingered over mine as she took a cup, and I felt the steady warmth of her fingers, the subtle squeeze that conveyed gratitude, trust, and something more. She rested her head for a moment against my shoulder while sipping, a soft exhale escaping her lips. It was a small, intimate gesture, one that spoke volumes without words. She allowed herself to lean on me, to share a closeness that felt entirely natural. We sat in silence after that, talking in hushed tones about everything and nothing. Her hand brushed against mine again, this time intentionally, and I didn't move away. The gentle touch, a lingering caress along the back of my hand, sent a shiver through me, a warmth that was both comforting and stirring. Each movement, each glance, each pause was deliberate yet effortless, a dance of closeness that neither of us rushed. By the time the evening had deepened into night, I realized something. This wasn't simply a reunion of old memories. It was a building of trust, intimacy, and subtle affection, a slow, steady pull toward each other, where touches, glances, and shared silences carried far more meaning than words ever could. And in that warm, quiet space, I felt the first true sense of connection, lingering, tender, and undeniably alive. Even as the evening wore on, a quiet tension began to settle between us. The warmth of the apartment and the softness of her presence had made closeness feel natural, almost inevitable, yet I could sense the undercurrent of hesitation, hers as well as my own. The easy laughter and gentle touches were tempered by a weight neither of us could name, a mixture of desire, doubt, and the awareness of the life experiences that separated us. I found myself watching her as she reached for her cup of tea, noting the graceful way her fingers wrapped around it, the subtle curve of her lips as she smiled at something I said. And yet, beneath that serene exterior, There was a trace of something I had learned to recognize over the years, a quiet caution, a wariness born from knowing the world's judgment. I wondered if she felt it too, this invisible barrier hovering between familiarity and intimacy. She began, her voice slightly hesitant, trailing off before completing the sentence. She looked down at her lap, fingers twisting lightly around the edge of her sleeve. That small, almost unconscious gesture made my chest tighten. I wanted to reach out, to steady her hand, but I paused, acutely aware that any sudden movement might break the fragile balance we'd achieved. "I'm not sure what's appropriate," I admitted, my own voice low and uncertain. I shifted slightly, keeping just enough distance to respect the space she might need, though every fiber of me wanted to be closer. "I mean, after all these years, it feels like we're walking into something we can't define." Her eyes lifted to meet mine, and I caught a flicker of vulnerability there, quickly masked by a small, self-deprecating smile. "I know," she said softly. "I keep thinking, what would people say? Or what if we ruin what we already have? It's complicated." Her fingers brushed against mine again, almost tentatively, a touch that was electric in its subtlety. The hesitation in that movement mirrored my own, the careful negotiation of desire, respect, and fear. We sat in silence for a few moments, the ambient sounds of the city drifting through the open window. The quiet was almost deafening, filled with unspoken thoughts, imagined consequences, and the pull of something neither of us wanted to name aloud. Every small glance, every slight brush of hands, every shared exhale carried weight. The emotional tension was palpable, yet it was not suffocating. Instead, it drew us closer, demanding honesty and self-reflection. Finally, she let out a soft sigh and leaned back slightly, as if giving herself permission to acknowledge her feelings. "I'm scared," she admitted quietly. "Not of you, not really, just everything else." Her hand lingered near mine on the sofa, a silent plea for understanding, for patience, for connection without pressure. And in that moment, I realized that the conflict wasn't about what we felt for each other. It was about navigating the space between longing and restraint, about honoring the past while cautiously stepping toward an uncertain future. The tension was real, yes, but it was also the spark that made everything feel alive, the slow-burning ember that promised depth, intimacy, and a connection worth exploring, no matter how complicated it seemed. We stayed like that for a while, hands near but not fully entwined, hearts beating in quiet rhythm, each of us wrestling with hesitation yet unwilling to let go. The evening had deepened into night, and a quiet intimacy settled over her apartment. The city outside hummed softly, but inside, time seemed to slow. We sat together on the sofa, the faint glow of a lamp casting gentle shadows across the room. There was a closeness between us now that had grown naturally, from touches, glances, and shared confidences, yet both of us still carried the unspoken hesitations of Part 5, the awareness of societal perceptions, of age, of the delicate boundary between care and something more. It happened almost imperceptibly. She shifted slightly, a subtle wince crossing her face as she stretched, and I noticed the faint tension in her shoulders. "Are you okay?" I asked softly, leaning closer without thinking. The question, simple as it was, carried concern, curiosity, and a tenderness I couldn't ignore. Just a little tired," she admitted, her voice quiet, almost vulnerable. She moved toward the armrest, and I instinctively reached out to steady her. My hand brushed hers as she leaned back, fingers catching briefly in a gentle, almost hesitant grasp. The contact was electric in its subtlety, warm, grounding, and intimate, yet it was nothing more than a natural gesture of care. "Come on," I said, my voice low and steady. "Let me help." She looked at me, a soft smile touching her lips, her eyes reflecting a mixture of gratitude, amusement, and something deeper that made my heart thrum. Slowly, carefully, I guided her toward the bedroom, supporting her with gentle pressure at her back. Her hand lingered on my arm for balance, the warmth of her skin a comforting weight that anchored both of us in the present. Once she was settled on the bed, sitting up with pillows propped behind her, I handed her a glass of water. Our fingers brushed again as she accepted it, and I felt the subtle electricity of proximity, a quiet acknowledgement that the dynamics between us had shifted. In that moment, I wasn't the boy she once babysat, and she wasn't the unattainable woman of my memories. We were two people sharing a moment of trust and tenderness, each aware of the emotional resonance of the other's presence. She leaned back, letting out a soft exhale, and for a moment, our eyes met. The room was filled with unspoken words, gratitude, care, admiration, and the quiet pull of attraction that had been building for hours, days, or even years. Her smile was soft, slightly playful, and yet tinged with vulnerability, a delicate invitation into the space we were creating together. I stayed close, sitting on the edge of the bed, my hand resting lightly on hers. She didn't pull away. Instead, she allowed herself to sink slightly into the comfort of the contact. The warmth of her skin, the gentle rhythm of her breathing, and the trust in her gaze made the tension of the past hours melt away. It was a turning point, subtle, unhurried, and profoundly human. A small, quiet moment of care, a reversal of roles that shifted our connection from tentative curiosity to something tangible and intimate. That night, the slow-burn tension didn't resolve into a dramatic confession or grand gesture. Instead, it crystallized in shared vulnerability, lingering touches, and the recognition that we were ready to move forward, together, cautiously, and with hearts open to what might come. The shift was gentle, almost imperceptible, but its effect was undeniable. Everything had changed. The night had settled fully, and her apartment was bathed in the soft glow of a single lamp. The city outside was quiet now, the distant hum of traffic a gentle undertone to our shared space. After the tender moment earlier, the small, intimate care that had shifted our dynamic, the tension that had hovered between us began to melt into something warmer, softer, more reassuring. We sat together on the bed, shoulders brushing, the faint weight of her hand resting on mine. There was no rush to speak, no need to fill the silence with words. The quiet intimacy was enough, the subtle press of her palm against mine, the warmth radiating from her body, the gentle rhythm of her breathing, all of it grounding me in a way I hadn't anticipated. It was as though the world outside had paused, leaving only the two of us suspended in this delicate, comforting moment. "I used to babysit you," she said softly, a teasing smirk touching her lips. "And now, you're putting me to bed." Her voice was playful, but her eyes carried a warmth that made my chest tighten. I laughed quietly, a low sound that seemed to blend with the quiet of the room, and I brushed a loose strand of hair from her face. My fingers lingered at her cheek, tracing the curve lightly, memorizing the subtle warmth of her skin. She leaned into my touch, just enough for me to feel the softness of her cheek against my fingertips, and I realized that every hesitation of the past hours, every doubt or unspoken fear, had dissolved into this moment of trust. Our smiles met, tentative at first, then steady and genuine, carrying the weight of years, memories, and a shared recognition of what had grown between us. I rested my forehead against hers, and the connection was immediate, electric in its simplicity. Her hand pressed gently against my chest, feeling the steady beat of my heart. I felt hers, too, through the subtle warmth of her palm, each pulse a reminder of vulnerability met with understanding. The room was quiet, but it was full of closeness, of unspoken desire, of affection that needed no words. We stayed like that for a long while, hands intertwined, foreheads touching, hearts slowly synchronizing. Every small gesture, the gentle brush of a thumb over a knuckle, the way she shifted closer, the quiet exhale she let escape as she relaxed against me, reinforced the intimacy that had been building since our reunion. There was no rush, no need to label it. The warmth of being near each other, the trust in shared silence, was enough. Finally, she let out a soft, contented sigh, and I smiled, feeling the steady grounding of our connection. In that moment, I knew this wasn't just a fleeting encounter. It was the beginning of something real, a slow-burning relationship rooted in care, respect, and deep emotional intimacy. The night ended quietly, with the gentle knowledge that we had crossed the threshold from tentative curiosity to a shared, heartfelt connection. I kissed the top of her hand, lingering just long enough for both of us to feel the tenderness in the gesture. She smiled softly, resting her head against my shoulder. And in that warm, unhurried closeness, I understood that some bonds don't need grand declarations. They grow quietly, carefully, with touch, trust, and the patient unfolding of hearts. For the first time, we weren't just revisiting old memories. We were creating new ones, together, slowly, with warmth, laughter, and the comforting promise of more to come.